in my experience, there's 3 different kinds of funders: a sustainer, campaigner, and launcher funder. I'm going to give you the overview of the 3 different types, and then we can get into detail about each one so that hopefully your listeners, if they want to be an effective donor, they can think about which category they want to focus in on. And I'll talk to you also about like why that's so important. Why, if you don't really do this kind of work, then you also could be wasting money and time, both of the nonprofits and your own time, and get disillusioned. I want you to keep giving, right? The difference between a sustainer, campaigner, and launcher is a sustainer cares about a nonprofit because it fits completely in line with what they want to do in the world. A sustainer donor cares more about the particular nonprofits that they're funding than maybe the issue even. Like if you think about it, you might care about that. You've done all the work and that nonprofit is working on an issue you care about, but it just is sort of defines who you are as a person, this group or a couple of groups that you're funding. So that's a sustainer donor. You want to fund that group or groups over and over again, year after year. You're completely committed to them. A campaigner donor cares more about changing a societal norm. They're worried about an issue in the world. They care more about that, like houselessness or climate change, than they do about any one particular nonprofit. And again, I feel like there's a lot of judgment that you put on yourself if you're actually a campaigner donor, but you say, oh, no, I actually care about sustaining year after year. You have to be true to yourself. If you really care more about moving the dial on an issue, then it's a different kind of giving strategy. And it's really important that the nonprofits know that right up front. It's worse if you say, I care so much about this issue, nonprofit, but I really care about you too. But then you start meddling with the nonprofit and saying, well, can't you work more on this part of the houselessness issue or climate change? Because, I see this and this, and I read an article here and here, and I'm really a sustainer donor. No. Just own it. If you're a campaigner donor, you want to move the needle on something, and I can talk to you about strategies to really own it and do it well rather than mess it up. And then the third kind of donor I see is a launcher donor. A launcher donor is similar to a campaigner donor because a launcher donor cares about moving the needle on a particular issue. They care about that more than any one nonprofit. However, the difference is a launcher donor is more like a venture capitalist in the business world. They love filling gaps. They love coming in and funding something really intensively for 2, 3, 4 years. Maybe even starting a whole new nonprofit because a particular issue isn't covered to move the needle on something, a particular part of that. Like maybe there's not enough communications or media strategy around moving the needle on an issue. Or maybe there's not enough grassroots advocacy, or maybe there's not enough scientific research. There might be a gap there. And so this person wants to come in and they want to really fund that gap and help the whole community move the needle on an issue by doing that. It also might mean they add money to a particular nonprofit they've been funding so that nonprofit can start a whole new arm of their work. Okay, so those are the 3 different kinds of donors. I feel really strongly that it's important that if you're a launcher donor, that you're really clear also with the nonprofit. You say, okay, you tell me, nonprofit, what is the gap? Okay, here's the issue I care about. I know you're working on this issue. What's the gap that needs to be filled? They'll tell you. The nonprofits are experts. They know what the gap is. Like, oh my gosh. But you have to ask them, because a lot of times a nonprofit will want to talk to you about what's in their own strategic plan and try to fund all those pieces. And then they'll say it. And then you'll say, okay, cool. So let's talk about how we can fill that gap, how I can support you. Usually it means too, as a funder, you're going to be collaborating with other funders. You also ultimately, if you're filling in a gap, you're going to want to fill in a gap in a way where over time, sustainer funders will come in, because you're only going to fund as a launcher funder 2, 3, 4 years. So you want to support the nonprofits to create a budget and a plan that's going to bring in the sustainer funder. So you can see how sustainer, campaigner, and launcher funders really, when it works well, they all work together super well. If you don't identify yourself as one of those 3 up front and really say, this is how I want to approach the kind of giving I'm doing, then like I said before, you can definitely make it confusing for the nonprofit and for yourself. And over time, you can get really disillusioned if you're not clear on that part.